The day my wife posted "Enjoy Poverty" under our wedding photo, I was standing in the courthouse hallway holding a box with my name crossed out. She had already changed her last name back, already moved into the glass tower downtown, already replaced me with a man whose watch cost more than our house. When my phone buzzed with the notification, a clerk glanced at the screen and looked away like poverty was contagious. That was how my erasure began, publicly, efficiently, and without apology. She didn't leave quietly, she made sure everyone saw it. At the farewell dinner she arranged for herself, she raised a glass beside him and said, "Some people are meant to stay small, others grow," then smiled at me like I was a lesson she'd outgrown. He laughed and added, "Ambition looks different depending on your bank balance." The room followed their lead. My name stopped being spoken directly. I became a cautionary example, a before photo people used to justify their comfort with betrayal. Within weeks, the humiliation turned administrative. My firm terminated my contract citing restructuring, even though I had trained half the department. Clients stopped returning calls. A senior partner pulled me aside and whispered, "You should lie low, his lawyers are aggressive." No accusation was ever written down, but somehow I was radioactive. Invitations vanished, references went cold, and I found myself delivering documents for companies I once advised, wearing a uniform that didn't have pockets deep enough to hide my hands shaking. She made sure the contrast stayed sharp. Her social feed became a steady stream of yachts, charity galas, and captions about choosing abundance. Friends I'd known for years liked the posts, then muted my number. When I ran into her once at a fundraiser where I was carrying trays, she didn't look surprised. She leaned close and said, "See, this is what happens when you don't evolve." He didn't even acknowledge me. Power doesn't need eye contact to assert itself. The silence afterward was worse than the insults. My family suggested I apologize for whatever I'd done, even though no one could name it. Bills stacked up and I sold my books, then my suits, then the watch my father gave me. Each transaction felt like another layer peeled away. At night, I replayed the same question until it lost meaning. How did my life collapse so cleanly? There were no explosions, just doors closing one by one, softly but permanently. I took a job at a private clinic delivering supplies because it paid weekly and didn't ask questions. The doctors nodded at me without seeing me, and that was fine. One afternoon, a nurse checked my ID for a routine form and paused longer than necessary. She frowned, typed something twice, then asked, "Have you ever been treated here before?" When I said no, she said, "That's strange," and called someone I couldn't see. The word strange followed me down the hallway like a shadow. A few days later, I was asked to come in early and wait. A man in a white coat sat across from me with a file thicker than it needed to be and said, "We need to verify some information." His tone wasn't medical, it was careful. He asked about my birth, my parents, my history, details I hadn't thought about in decades. When I asked why, he closed the file and said, "Because there's a discrepancy we can't ignore," then excused himself without explaining. Outside, my phone buzzed again. It was her for the first time in months. The message was a screenshot of an article about layoffs in my old industry with a caption, "Told you security is an illusion." I didn't reply. I sat there watching the clinic doors open and close, thinking about the nurse's pause, the doctor's careful voice, and the word discrepancy echoing louder than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. That night, I went back to my apartment with the flickering light and the view of a brick wall. I laid out the last of my documents on the table, trying to decide what to sell next. Beneath them was an old envelope I'd never opened, forwarded years ago from an address that no longer existed. I held it for a long time without tearing it, sensing that whatever was inside had waited patiently for this exact moment, and that my humiliation wasn't the end of the story. The next weeks compressed my world into routines designed to keep me invisible. I delivered supplies, clocked out, and returned to rooms where no one asked questions. My old colleagues passed me in hallways without recognition, their conversations dropping mid-sentence like I'd triggered an alarm. When I tried to apply elsewhere, responses came back instantly polite and permanently closed. One recruiter finally said, "Off the record, your name raises concerns," then ended the call before I could ask whose concerns those were. Financial pressure turned deliberate. My bank reduced my credit line without warning, citing updated risk assessments. A landlord who had praised my reliability suddenly wanted cash up front or eviction. I learned how quickly dignity dissolves when systems align against you. Every appeal met the same soft refusal, the same language polished to sound neutral. It felt coordinated, but coordination requires intent, and intent requires someone important enough to care about erasing me. She cared enough to keep watching. A mutual friend let slip that she asked about me occasionally, not out of concern but curiosity. "Is he still delivering boxes?" she asked, according to him, then laughed. He warned me gently, "You should disappear for a while." That was the advice people give when power has already decided the outcome. Disappearing was exactly what they expected and exactly what was happening. The clinic became my only stable environment, though stability there felt conditional. The nurse from before avoided my eyes, but the doctor with the careful tone requested I fill out more forms. He asked about family medical history I didn't have answers to, about documents that had been lost or never existed. When I shrugged, he said, "We'll request records," like it was routine. Yet his assistant locked the file drawer afterward, a small action that carried weight. Outside the clinic, my reputation continued to rot without explanation. An online forum speculated about my ethical issues, anonymous posts repeating the same vague language. None of it was provably false, which made it impossible to challenge. I watched my name become shorthand for something undesirable, a warning sign people used to reassure themselves they were safe. The more I tried to understand it, the clearer it became that understanding wasn't required for damage to spread. I considered leaving the city, but every option closed before it opened. Job applications disappeared into silence, background checks stalled indefinitely. Even a temp agency told me, "You're overqualified for this and underqualified for anything else." That paradox followed me everywhere. At night, I dreamed of doors with handles that turned but never opened and woke up with the sense that someone else was holding the keys waiting. One afternoon, the clinic's administrative director asked me to stay after my shift. She sat across from me with a neutral smile and said, "We've been contacted regarding your file." When I asked by whom, she said, "Multiple parties," and slid a consent form forward. The language referenced verification, lineage, and authority in ways that didn't belong in healthcare. Before I could process it, she added, "Declining isn't recommended," then watched carefully as I signed. The first tangible sign that something didn't add up came quietly. A courier arrived for me, not the clinic, requiring a signature and identification. The package contained copies of records from decades ago, stamped and re-stamped, bearing my name alongside annotations I didn't recognize. One page had been circled in red with a handwritten note, "Confirmed match." No explanation followed, just a request to remain available. For the first time in months, someone needed me present. Meanwhile, her world glittered louder. An engagement announcement surfaced, complete with interviews about building a future. In one clip, she said, "I learned that stability comes from choosing the right partner," and the interviewer nodded. Watching it, I felt the last of my anger drain away, replaced by something colder. If all of this was random, it was an impressive coincidence. If it wasn't, then someone had been patient long before I learned to be. The truth didn't arrive as a confession or a dramatic meeting. It came through process, verification, and people who suddenly treated my time as valuable. The clinic stopped scheduling me for deliveries and asked me to wait instead. A legal representative introduced herself without saying who she worked for, only that she needed to confirm my identity beyond standard records. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word would be audited. When I asked why now, she said, "Because your case finally surfaced." What surfaced wasn't a secret I'd been keeping. It was one I'd never been told. The old envelope I'd ignored for years was suddenly requested by name. When I brought it in unopened, the representative didn't seem surprised. She explained that my birth records had been sealed following a settlement tied to medical negligence and inheritance protection. My parents weren't hiding something from me, they had been instructed to. "You were never meant to need this," she said, "until you did." The discrepancy the doctor mentioned was genetic, not medical. A rare marker connected me to a family line that maintained its affairs privately, through trusts and institutional proxies rather than public wealth. The name meant nothing to me, but the reaction to it did. Conversations stopped when it was mentioned. Verification teams worked in parallel, confirming through independent sources. Each confirmation tightened the room, replacing skepticism with restraint. No one congratulated me. That would have been inappropriate. I learned that the collapse of my career hadn't started with my divorce. It began when my name crossed a compliance system triggered by her new partner's financial structure. In trying to assert dominance, he had unknowingly flagged assets connected to protected entities. The response wasn't personal, it was procedural. My reputation was sacrificed as a buffer while institutions assessed risk. I wasn't targeted for punishment. I was isolated for containment. She still believed the story she told. In her version, I was small, predictable, defeated. She posted about resilience and upgrading one's life, unaware that her security was being audited in silence. The engagement interviews continued, but sponsors quietly withdrew. Invitations were delayed, then canceled. She assumed it was market volatility. He assured her everything was fine, even as his calls stopped being returned. Confidence is easy when consequences are deferred. Legal representative returned with documents I wasn't allowed to take home. They outlined authority structures, conditional access, and a role that required confirmation before activation. "This isn't about money," she said, anticipating the question I didn't ask. "It's about responsibility." My signature didn't unlock anything dramatic. It acknowledged reality. Systems that had pushed me out now adjusted, recalibrating around a variable they'd misclassified. I wasn't instructed to act. In fact, I was advised not to. "Visibility will increase on its own," the representative said. "Intervention would complicate matters." That restraint felt unfamiliar after months of reacting. I returned to my routines, still anonymous, still underestimated. The difference was internal. I knew the humiliation had been temporary, not because I'd endure it heroically, but because it had never been the full picture. The final confirmation came without ceremony. A senior compliance officer from a bank I'd been locked out of requested a meeting, then apologized for the inconvenience I'd experienced. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Walking out, I understood that power had already shifted quietly and irrevocably. The people who believed they'd won were still celebrating, unaware that the ground beneath them had been surveyed, measured, and marked. By the time any of them realized what had happened, it was already too late. The systems they relied on, legal, financial, institutional, had begun correcting themselves quietly. Accounts previously frozen were reinstated under my verified authority. Contracts that had been voided or ignored were reviewed, flagged, and redirected. I received notices not as an individual seeking revenge, but as the rightful party whose absence had caused the disruption. Every bureaucratic action that once punished me now worked on my behalf, silent and relentless. She was the first to sense the shift, though she didn't know why. Invitations she had counted on vanished from her calendar. Meetings she believed would solidify her influence were delayed or reassigned. Vendors she relied on called to confirm signatures she no longer had authority to grant. Her confidence faltered in private moments she thought were unseen. He continued to reassure her, but his tone changed subtly, clipped, because the channels they trusted were no longer aligned with them. The legal framework moved like clockwork. Notices arrived that certain assets had been verified, others placed under temporary administration, all without my direct involvement. I watched the updates quietly from a corner office at the clinic, still performing routine tasks, unnoticed but fully aware. The satisfaction was not in confrontation, it was in observation. The people who had humiliated me now experienced delays, setbacks, and corrections delivered impersonally by systems they had assumed were loyal to them. Financial institutions contacted intermediaries rather than me, as though my authority was a matter of record, not negotiation. Every transfer, every compliance check, every regulatory verification reinforced the reversal of control. I never called, I never emailed, I didn't need to. Silence amplified the effect, letting their own assumptions and arrogance work against them. By the time they grasped what had occurred, the consequences were already documented, irrevocable, and undeniable. Her last post that I noticed was a subtle admission, though unintentional. A photo of her smiling at a gala carried the faint comment, "Some things aren't as secure as they seem." The words weren't directed at me, but at the empty spaces left by her own oversight. The man she had chosen to replace me now faced restrictions on accounts and authority he had assumed were granted. Every move they made had been anticipated by the invisible correction of the systems that I now commanded indirectly. Power had shifted without spectacle, without violence, without any public declaration of intent. I returned to routines that now carried weight. Delivering supplies, attending appointments, even mundane paperwork became part of a structure that reinforced my restored position. No one treated me differently overtly, but each interaction carried the undercurrent of authority and recognition. I could see hesitation in eyes that had previously ignored me, small pauses that spoke volumes. They didn't understand why, but they could feel it, how a quiet presence can exert control far more efficiently than a loud one. The reversal concluded with their self-destruction. Contracts they had manipulated for advantage were invalidated by pre-existing clauses they had ignored. Investments they relied on were frozen until verification cleared the proper heirs. Their attempts to maintain appearances fell flat because reality had been quietly reasserted. I never intervened directly. The humiliation they had orchestrated came back not through revenge but through systemic inevitability. They watched powerless as what they had built on illusion unraveled. I remained calm, uncelebratory, dignified. Every step was deliberate and measured. The final outcome did not require confrontation because the systems themselves had delivered the consequences. I walked through my world, still largely unseen, yet fully present in ways they could no longer challenge. The quiet satisfaction of correctness replaced the earlier anger, a measured closure that no social media post could imitate. Everything they had done to erase me became a testament to their own miscalculation, leaving me the observer and ultimate arbiter of the silent reversal. The public explanation came months later, stripped of drama and delivered through neutral language. A compliance bulletin referenced a restructuring tied to previously misattributed authority. No names were emphasized, but everyone who mattered understood the implication. Her engagement quietly dissolved, not announced, just erased from feeds and conversations. He stepped down from several boards citing personal reasons. The silence around them grew heavier than any scandal because silence suggests permanence. People move on quickly when there's nothing to defend. I encountered her one final time by accident in a lobby where she no longer belonged. She looked smaller, not physically but socially, like someone whose reflection no longer matched the mirrors around her. She recognized me immediately and hesitated before speaking, calculating risk out of habit. "I didn't know," she said, as if ignorance were currency. I nodded once, not in forgiveness or contempt but acknowledgement, then walked past her without slowing. The aftermath for me was deliberately quiet. Authority doesn't announce itself when it's legitimate. I didn't reclaim old positions or seek public vindication. Those spaces had revealed their fragility. Instead, I was offered roles that existed above reputation, advisory in nature, insulated from spectacle. The same institutions that once erased me now deferred to my confirmation. The reversal wasn't emotional, it was structural. My life stabilized without applause, built on processes that didn't require belief. What stayed with me wasn't the satisfaction of watching them fall, but the clarity that came from endurance. Humiliation had forced me into stillness, and stillness had exposed the difference between attention and power. She had chosen visibility, mistaking it for security. He had chosen dominance, assuming it was permanent. Neither had understood how quietly systems correct arrogance when patience outlasts pride. People occasionally asked how I survived that period, framing it like resilience or character. I never corrected them. The truth was simpler and less flattering. I survived because I had no alternative and because I didn't interrupt the process with desperation. Silence protected me when words would have incriminated. Endurance kept me intact when reaction would have scattered whatever leverage I didn't yet know I had. In private moments, I revisited the early humiliation not with bitterness but with analysis. Each insult, each dismissal had been a data point revealing how power behaves when it believes it's unobserved. The cruelty wasn't personal, it was convenient, understanding that removed the sting. It also ensured I would never replicate it. Authority that requires humiliation to function is already failing. My life now operates beyond comparison. There are no posts to counter hers, no narrative to correct publicly. The truth exists in records, in decisions that move without noise, and outcomes that don't need explanation. When people mention her name, it's without heat, like referencing a closed case. That neutrality is the final consequence. Being forgotten by the systems you once tried to manipulate is a deeper loss than being opposed. I learned that revenge doesn't require action when time and structure are aligned. It requires restraint, accuracy, and the willingness to let others reveal themselves fully before correction occurs. The dignity I lost publicly returned privately, intact and unchallenged. And in the end, the story didn't conclude with triumph or forgiveness, but with balance restored quietly, the way it always does when patience outlasts arrogance and truth no longer needs defending.